We just found my mom. She's on the girl that's in her. She's stiff and I don't know. Are you in Madison County or Fremont County? Alright.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. While many of us are anxiously awaiting the verdict in the Doomsday Dad's trial, it feels like it should be coming out later today, but who knows, we may have to wait until Monday. Now, one area that I think is certainly disturbing in this case is the indoctrination of the kids. One of the saddest things about Tammy's murder, I'm reading a comment that I noticed on an East Idaho news video. One of the saddest things about Tammy's murder is that none of her children are willing to stand up for her. They are all supporting their ghastly father who did nothing for them except turn them into people who will stand by. Now, if the Doomsday Cult case is discomforting, that discomfort goes up a gear or two when we deal with how some of the Daybell brood seem to see reality, and that's reality in quotes. Having a discombobulated sense of reality begins in an enmeshed family situation, and one of the surest ways to enmeshing a family is in religion, especially extreme religion. A family that has all its members believing the same thing acts like a cult in its own right. And that family then taking hands with other families and other congregations then creates this super cult. By the way, the word enmesh means to be entangled, entrapped, embroiled, ensnared, right? So when someone in a family is murdered, in a family that is enmeshed to that extent, as Tammy was, the default setting then is to simply remain loyal to the original programming and the original programmer. And who sets the programming? The patriarch. Who said it in this case? Chad Daybell. So in this analysis, we want to look at two of the children, Emma Murray and Goth Daybell, their testimonies and what they said to defend Chad Daybell. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So Emma, in the Daybell case, there seems to be a scenario of at least two children making dubious statements. One, Emma, the daughter, claiming she had conducted the Google search for wind direction on the day prior to Tylee's body being burned, presumably in the backyard of the Daybell property. Now, when last did you make a search for wind direction? Now, referring to an article KSL dealing with the Daybell children's testimony, you know, the article title is pretty disillusioning, that the children basically say that their mother was tired, that their mother was weak. In any event, from that article, quote, Emma Murray worked with their mother, Tammy Daybell, at the same elementary school and lived nearby with her husband, Goth Daybell. Goth Daybell, visibly nervous and self-described as pretty shy, wore a similar haircut, shirt and tie as his father, with a sweater over the top. He lived in the house with his parents when his mother died. Now, as far as I understand it, was he the only Daybell child to live with Chad? Going back to the article, Murray testified that her mother's health had been declining in the last year or so of her life, and that Tammy Daybell was noticeably more tired, going to bed before dinner on some nights. She spoke of her mother's anemia and claimed that even carrying grocery bags left bruises on her mother's arms. Now, I don't know whether this is true. If it is true, I would speculate that there may have been some sort of chemical effort to undermine Tammy, as you saw in the Chris Watts case, but I'm not sure whether it is true. She seemed, if anything, to be sportier and running around a lot more, closer to the end of her life, and other people didn't observe the same thing. Back to the article. On cross-examination, Freeman County Prosecutor Lindsay Blake asked if Murray would be surprised to learn there was no mention of anemia or sleep apnea in Tammy Daybell's medical records. Her mother was an extremely private person, Emma said. She never spoke of her health with others. Defense attorney John Pryor asked Murray at length about her mother's physical fitness. She said that her mom would shake her arm to get more steps on her Fitbit because she competed with her family to win fitness challenges. So this whole thing about winning fitness challenges also suggests someone who is healthy, wants to be healthy, and I think the Fitbit probably will ultimately prove the fitness of Tammy Daybell. Was she tending towards more fitness at that time or less? Prosecutors earlier in the trial used data from her Fitbit to show her activity was above average until she died. Well, there you have it. Now let's deal with Goth. Goth's dodgy and kind of aborted 911 call in which he claims to have found his mother with his father present. But that's not what he told a colleague. He didn't say that we found Tammy. He said that Chad was absent. Back to the article, Goth Daybell testified that he was concerned his mother was getting tired extremely easily. He told the jury his mother would come home from work and collapse, get winded very easily, and experienced fainting spells after she had been kneeling for a while. Again, if this is true, the fainting spells may be due to being poisoned in some way. Again, I'm not sure if it is true. The Fitbit seems to tell a different story. The article also notes previous witnesses have testified that Tammy Daybell, 49 years old, appeared to be healthy in the weeks before her death. Now, by reality, we're talking about this idea of a son covering up for his potentially scheming, allegedly murderous father, who at that stage was facing a body count of 3, arguably 4, which puts us into serial killer territory. Someone was saying to me, I can't identify with this case. I don't really see anything interesting about it. We are in a way dealing with the sort of worst kind of evil, which is where someone gets someone else to commit multiple murders. There's something inherently evil about someone committing one murder, but where you get somebody else to do it for you, that is pretty incredible. I mean, imagine having a serial killer that is doing someone else's bidding. That is exactly what we're sort of talking about here. Think about the other aspect, 3 dead people found on a particular property. Have you ever had a dead person exhumed from your property? How about 2? How about 3? The thing that enmeshed the Daybells with the Vellos was the Doomsday cult, and it's also the driving force that destroyed half of one family and the matriarch of the other, and it came quite close to killing other people as well. Where does the gall come from to just keep on killing? Well, if you're surrounded by trusting sheep who can't summon an iota of critical thinking, is there anything to stop you? Is there anyone to stop you? If anything, with each successive death, your power grows, and if you're a person with impotency and insufficiency and feelings of insignificance, that feeling of power can be quite giddy. You might feel a rush. And meanwhile, those around you are learning to fear and respect the perpetrator, not in the real world as one should as a criminal, but apparently as the Lord's divine instrument. It shouldn't be surprising that Chad's son Goth, who was living with him at the time of Tammy's murder, narrowly escaped perjury charges. If Goth was under some sort of influence, some sort of spell, where the outside world is evil and untrustworthy, isn't that a justification for behaving himself in dishonest and untrustworthy ways? Can Chad's kids think for themselves, or are they under some sort of influence, some kind of remote mind control? In one rare interview they gave, it appeared the Daybell brood were in consensus that their father had been framed. But, as in the Karen Reid case, it wasn't clear specifically by who or why. It seemed like during defense arguments yesterday, Pryor seemed to be suggesting all sorts of people could have been the other perpetrators. But specifically, Laurie and Alex were potential co-conspirators and Chad the victim. That makes sense if you neatly excise the Hawaiian honeymoon chapter from the story, along with Chad and Laurie's dalliance. In terms of the true power struggle between Chad and Laurie, I do think it's interesting that all three bodies are on Chad's property. That's very much on him. And why do you think both Laurie's kids disappear and none of Chad's? Why do none of Chad's kids need to disappear? Many of us can clearly see how screwy some of their interpretations of reality are in terms of their father and mother. But why can't they see what's really going on? And that brings us to cultural setting. It's tough to see reality if your family all have the same views and that family is situated within a cultural continent with the same beliefs as well. You only know the reality of a belief system when you're able to move outside of it, right outside of it, and beyond it, way beyond it. And guess what? Many don't, can't, or won't. I know when I left South Africa and lived in South Korea for 4 years, I was completely out of the network that I was used to, and my view of the world changed quite significantly. And I also realized how naive I had been up until that point. It took going into a completely different environment where I experienced severe cultural shock to reflect on my own culture. That's a very valuable thing to do, and some people experience that through extended periods of travel. Now, going back to the article, Murray described her father's religious views as fundamental, many of which are not typical of Latter-day Saint beliefs. On one occasion, she described her father exercising a being inside of her that was causing her anxiety. If you're doing this to your own children, they don't think it's very strange. If you're doing it to somebody else, not very strange. And so Emma said, I felt like there was an actual person trying to control me. Well, where did she get that idea? She also testified that her mother regularly ascribed death percentages to people. I find this really disturbing. That even Tammy regularly ascribed death percentages to people like Chad did, and also rated people as light or dark, based on people's motivations or whether they were acting like Jesus Christ or Satan. So you can imagine the Daybell kids hearing about folks being labeled light or dark, sounding warmly familiar in the setting of the courtroom, while to many of us, it's appalling. According to the article, Goth Daybell described his father's faith as traditional, or the way things were 100 years ago. I don't know, if I knew someone who was acting like people did 100 years ago, I wouldn't call it traditional, I'd call it archaic. Anyway, the middle school science teacher testified that there were differences between his faith and his father's faith, including concepts such as evolution versus creationism and the age of the earth. Now, this is also a concern that Goth, coming from the background that he comes from, is teaching science. He is a teacher. But this is also one way the indoctrination spreads, through writers, teachers, and educators. And where did Tammy and Emma work? Well, also for an elementary school. Going back to the article, on October 18, 2019, the evening before Tammy's death, Goth Daybell said he was asked to drive into Rexburg to McDonald's as his mother didn't feel well enough to cook. He dropped the food off, he said, and around 7 p.m. he left her sitting on the couch. So the food was dropped off. One wonders whether someone else had access to that food. As far as I know, it was a normal night, he testified, adding that he heard snoring from his parents' room that night when he returned from work about 1 a.m. Well, that's the same thing Barry Morphew said, also that he heard his wife snoring. Is that likely? Is that true? Is that an honest account? It's not clear whether this story is true, but if it is, this is the area where I suspect sedatives or some sort of chemical may have been used to get Tammy out of sorts and prepare her for Chad, to weaken her, to undermine her. The next morning, according to the article, Garth said he was awakened by his father, and he said, I heard my dad saying, Garth, get up, I need help. I saw her halfway off the bed with her legs still entangled in the blankets. That's also kind of, is that true? Because he'd earlier said that he found her on the ground when he arrived home. So was she carried to her bed or not? Murray testified that she went to the house before 7 a.m. that day and described her father as more distressed than I've ever seen him in my entire life. She testified that she was the one who didn't want an autopsy for her mother, saying her father never expressed an opinion. Well, do you think Chad would have wanted an autopsy, given that Tammy was asphyxiated? Do you think Chad would have wanted an autopsy as well. But listen to this comment in the context of true crime from Emma. She said, I don't think autopsy should be done on anyone. Oh, so don't do autopsies on anyone ever. Don't try and find out why someone died. Just take someone else's word for it. Autopsies certainly aren't pleasant, but they are an important, very important tool when it comes to enforcement of the law and justice and finding out what really happened to a person. I mean, one of the things that an autopsy does is it speaks for the dead. It's the dead person being able to account for their injuries. And without that autopsy, someone else is now accounting for that. Then the final thing, concerning the increase in Tammy Daybell's life insurance policy before her death, Emma testified that the Ballard Insurance Group encouraged teachers at the women's school to increase their life insurance, and they both did so without telling or consulting their husbands. So even Emma increased her life insurance. On cross-examination, Lindsay Blake showed the jury life insurance documentation, and this is important, with both Tammy and Chad's signatures signed on the same date. So Chad would have been well aware of that. Chad probably was certainly pushing for that. Once again, Emma was simply repeating probably what she was told, only it was a lie. And that is how fake beliefs come about, lies repeated uncritically by others until the lie becomes the new reality. It takes a court of law to expose the lie and liars to themselves, but then I suppose you could say the court is part of some evil conspiracy and the alternative truth still remains the truth. Is this case going to really change the indoctrination that has taken root in some of the people in this case? Is it really going to change hearts and minds in any fundamental way? Is it going to undo the that sort of fundamentality that's there to begin with? You can see a situation like this, the truth is whatever you decide it is, which is precisely what it was for the gods that were Chad and Laurie. The truth is whatever we decide it is. Well, until it wasn't, until they were taken into custody, until they were in the court's custody, until they were and are imprisoned. For all his divine wisdom, Chad wasn't able to predict himself sitting in a courtroom for 2 months accused of capital murder, nor for that matter, the verdict. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.